Welcome to today's video where I sit with two of our lead developers here at Joyfill to break down what it takes to build and maintain a form library inside of your product. It establishes credibility in the eyes of your audience when a product provides these valuable resources. And in the case of this video, pre-built form templates as that resource. With all the questions we've received from developers on the easiest way to pull this off, we've put together some practical tips for you today. So let's dive in. So I have some questions to ask, but before I do want to clarify what we mean by a form library. A form library is a bank of pre-built form templates that are readily available for the users of an application to access and fill out as needed. So let's go ahead and just jump into some questions. This video is specific on the implementation of a form library. So in keeping it kind of surface, someone already knows that they want to offer 10, 20 specific forms that are very specific to their industry, that every user that signs up or that they have available, they would use these forms in some way, whether it's some of them or all of them, but they want to offer that inside the product as a fillable form. So my first question I want to ask is, why would a company want to offer a form library for their users inside of their product? What are some benefits?
Well, John, you touched on the first one, which is it makes you look awesome when you have like pre-built, ready-to-use forms. There is a trust factor there. I think the second most valuable piece of a form library is just time to value. So time to value being they didn't have to build it from scratch. Even if they want to modify it and customize a form, more likely than not, they want to start from a template that's similar to what they're trying to do. Doesn't matter how easy the form builder is to use. Nobody feels like building forms. Just don't. Nobody wants to take the time to do it. And they're trying to get to the end result. So I think the time to value is probably the best and most valuable aspect of a form library.
I feel like when users, maybe when they're comparing you against other products, when they see that you have a relevant resource and something that's very upheld to a specific requirement or standard for the industry that your users are in.
Pros and cons of providing a full form builder and form filler into your product. You typically will get the first thought of okay, well, do I build this or do I just use something like everything? What you have to ask yourself, I think, as a developer, just like with anything, is do I really want to build something that I know might have a very increasing scope as our company adds, new verticals to what customers are targeting, new features, back office starts needing something, different departments now need their own, flow of forms. Do I want to start allocating all these developer resources to build stuff that has been around since the beginning of the web, which is forms, or just like email and these other complex things, calendar stuff, that's a big one, date stuff, nobody builds that from scratch anymore. And the reason is because it's just been solved. Now with forms, it really hasn't been solved in a clean way, and that's what Joyfill is doing. But with Joyfill, you could even just say, hey, I just want to, I'll have a schema, because what they're going to do is they're going to build something and it's going to be developer focused, developers making the changes and stuff like that. So even if I don't want to plug in a builder and have my back office people building their own forms, or let me just build something where I can set the forms up once. Nobody even has to set the builder up. I could just use the filler. So some people might get intimidated when they see all this functionality coming in, but there's parts of it you can plug and play that still give you all the flexibility of a super powerful form builder that's not going to constrain you based on a department or customers or just increasing demand from your customers for new features and things like that. So you don't need the full experience. Just like when you're building date stuff, you could go as small as something like Moment.js or Day.js, where you're just using kind of the code stuff. You need some time zone specific stuff. Or you could go as far as building out a full calendar, and then you're using calendar components, or you're going straight to Nihilist to integrate email with calendar. So Joyfill is kind of like that. You can go as far as you want or as little as you want, but the important part is, are you building on a foundation that lets you quickly expand to added scope, features, departments, new customer requirements, or else you're going to be in a world of hurt because now you're developing a huge part of your developer resources to constantly keep up with forms when it's almost silly, because it's Forms have been around for so long. Don't waste your time innovating on the wrong thing. Get your team back to focusing on your core product. Don't be fussing around with forms when that's already been solved, which in our case is Joyfill. So to tie it back into templates, form library, the form library is, I mean, depending on whether it's customer facing or not, that's just a feature to forms. So my library is just a set of templates. But whether I'm building those templates from scratch and then duplicating that data as a developer, or I'm using a tool like Joyfill that does that for me, that's just one feature to the forms. If I'm thinking about, hey, I need a form library, what am I talking about? Am I talking about just a bunch of raw PDFs that I'm giving to them and it's Adobe Acrobat? In that case, it's not really the developer's problem. That's probably just some other department doing that. Or if they need a custom data flow where I need a library of a certain amount of forms, and then those forms feed into other areas of our product or things like that, or we need to run calculations or process the data, anything beyond basic PDF filling, even though you could use Joyfill for that as well, that library is actually kind of a trick term, because you think as a developer, I just need a form library, it's some way to put some data in and I'm done. But typically, that's never where it ends. It always goes way beyond that. You need 10 other things. So yes, tie it back into form library. You want to use Joyfill because of the form library stuff. And as a SaaS product, of course, you want your templates that are already structured exactly the way you need for your customers, for your departments, whether they're front-facing or not. But like, what happens when you get one more feature request for a more complex field for every single one of those templates? Now you need to go build. You're probably using developer resources, where with Joyfill, you could just plop it in. Or even with some of these cool component libraries, you can just plop it in there. So to me, form library is a real loaded term, because you never really it's never just a form library. It's like, that's just a feature to a full form data flow build out.
Right. Yeah. Rarely is it a 5 different OSHA forms that just are to be downloaded. It's more so in the topic of this video, it's that they want to fill that form with data, whether they're filling out manually or they want to input customer information with one click, depending on how it's hooked up with your system and your back end. It's rarely just a click download on one of these PDFs. It's more so, oh no, I got to fill it out within this product, and then I got to then save it or store it somewhere. So yeah, there's a lot more things that go into than just a form library. And just to clarify, in the case of this video again, is that these are fillable forms within the application that your users will fill out. Jeremy, thanks for that. That's actually a good segue into the next question. What are the prerequisites before adding a form library into your product, if any?
Well, Jeremy kind of touched on a couple of them. I would just say, when you're building a template library, there's going to be a lot of work that goes into it. Hopefully AI makes this easier in the future. But just make sure that whatever template library you're building is something that can evolve with time, because it's likely you're going to add new specs. You're going to want to change some of the designs or themes, and you don't want to be stuck on, like, for instance, what Jeremy said, if you're building PDFs, like fillable PDFs, and it's based on the ISO 32000 standard, and you're literally locked into PDFs, and it's very rigid and hard to change those. So I think it really understanding the nature of how this thing will grow and evolve over time. And today you might only have 20 templates, but in 5 years from now, you might have thousands of templates, right? And so, how are you going to manage those, and how are those structures going to evolve? Because you don't want to have to redo them every year or every couple of years when you decide something's changing. Again, maybe scripting and things could help you, but ideally you're thinking through how this needs to be for the future too. As much as you can know. Not everything's knowable, of course, but as much as you can know. That's why Joyfill is JSON-based, because it's very easy to, if you want to support new things or new structures or evolve styles or things like that, it's very easy to run JSON through a script or a process that updates all those across the board really easily and just resaves the template. So very easy to do. Doesn't require necessarily human intervention. So that's an important thing.
Just to add one to Josh's is even just adding new templates fast, and if there's anything custom about them. So you need a type of form that's pretty generic and public, but you need some tweaks to it. And so you go in there and you want to tweak it easily, but that's, that can be hard to do when you start getting into dozens of forms, for sure.
Right. So they start with 10 next year, 2 change, and 1 was added. So now you're at 11, but you have to make 3 different. So you're saying before building, consider do you just want to make this a static form library, or do you want it to make it something that can be added to or modified? And let's say the best route is, I believe, the latter, which is make it to where it can be modified just because you don't really know what's going to happen in 5 years. So let's say that's the case. Before I go to the next question, would you guys give any pointers on going that route versus the easier static route?
I mean, just making it easy to change them is really important. I don't think you should go the static route personally. If you're thinking I'm only going to build this and never touch it again, that's probably just not a true reality. I would say too that when you're building the template library, another important thing is do not make it developer dependent. Like part of why Joyfill did what it did with the UI builder is that we come across a lot of situations where people just expected the developers to build the template. So the templates are like HTML and CSS based, and it requires like technical knowledge to build these templates. That's like using your most valuable, not to say anybody other role is not valuable, but a very expensive resource to do what should be a relatively inexpensive task. And so definitely do not design a template-based system that requires engineers to build the templates. Because one, they're also probably not the closest to your customers. You would want your customer, your go-to-market teams who know what standards or templates your customers are using, and then they can just build them themselves. So definitely when you're designing a template-based approach, a prerequisite should be make this independent of a developer actually building the template itself. The developer will have to build the engine or integrate an engine, but he should not literally have to say this text box goes here and this text box goes here and this table goes here. Like that would be crazy to do it.
That's a really good point. Okay, great. So moving on to my last question, being that you guys have done this multiple times already, can you walk us through the steps to implementing a fully featured form library?
How much time you got?
Let's keep it simple. Let's keep it a couple minutes.
I think Josh is well prepared to keep it high level.
High level is one, make sure it's organized well. Two, that who's building it and how are they building it, not mainly pointing to the fact it should not be engineer based outside the initial integration. And then I really think it just goes down to how would you use any other valuable data in your system? Ideally, it's categorized, it's searchable. There's an ability to preview the form, right, even before they add it to their account. It's actually just simple user-based approaches. And then obviously design it so that your customer can build their own template library. And what I mean by that is you have your standard library that it maybe is by industry or categories or topics, and there's templates in there and they look good, but your customer is going to want to probably modify them and add to there. So make sure you're building your standard template library architecture, but then also giving your customers the ability to take it into like a multi-tenant approach, save it in their account and modify it and use it the way they want. So you're going to kind of, at a minimum, probably design those two tiers of the template library. But yeah, it's just like normal base stuff. I need to search it. I need to be able to categorize it, potentially make it really easily accessible to fill out and edit. Nothing fancy there, literally just make it usable.
I think to add to that too, I think it's easy to make the mistake in the beginning where you're building your product and all that, and you have your database, for instance. And it's like, okay, we have a team. Now I could build this so that every time something needs updated or changed on, a structure of data that is filled by a customer or a team in the company, I need to go into our database, manually update those records every single time, change the schema, modify, and then it'll all be set up and then they can do it. Now, if you tell that to a developer, they're like, that's crazy. Just build that admin interface, make it easy, give them access, because you're going to bog up the developer team. And that's like just such an annoying thing to do as a developer. So it's the same thing with forms, right? You can build it so that you're having to manually go in there and change things every time as those needs inevitably change. Or you could use Joyfill, which is like using an admin tool for a process. But in this case, it's even more flexible because once the requirement of the form changes, you're covered, but also once your requirement of your data flow changes. What happens when you need to really use the data from those forms in either large ways or complex ways? It becomes very annoying to get that data out, know what the schemas are, things like that, even if you built it yourself, small changes, things like that. But anyways, if you could kind of look at it like that, like I would never do that. I would always build an interface for people to use and take that off my hands as a developer. And it's the same thing with forms. Forms are just scarier than that because until you have to handle them, you don't know what you're getting into. Whereas developers have all built web apps, so we know what we're getting into. We can do it quick. But with forms, it just gets crazy really quick, and you don't realize that till you start building.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like an admin dashboard to manage your template library.
Very cool. As a bonus question, can you walk us through the documentation we have to show how simple it can be?
Okay, so inside of Joyfill, we do have the ability to essentially store a list of templates built, query them, update them. And the main area that you're going to hit for that is really the API reference. And this kind of just shows our API, but let's just start mainly from go down to templates because we're talking about the template library. But with Joyfill, there's literally a templates-based route that allows you to create a template using what is called the JoyDoc payload. It's just a standardized JSON object that we support that knows how to render the forms in our builder and in our filler interfaces. But mainly a lot of the ones that you're going to be looking for is listing the templates after they've been created. Of course, we have create, update, syncing changes, deleting them, normal CRUD-based operations, but we also allow you to list them. And it's just an API GET request. And you can list it by limit, page, group. And so again, this is like the interface to the Joyfill. If I go to app.joyfill, it's a way to interface with our library that we've built here. It's pretty minimal. You can obviously make it more robust based on your own implementation because you can store and save all the data. But this is all the CRUD operations that we actually use for our own library here to list out templates, to search them. This is our implementation of a simple template library, which essentially allows you to have templates. Then from your template list, we just listed out, you can edit the form, you can fill it out, and there's different implementations of that, but it's all using these API routes that we've designed, which is the ability to create templates, query them, and then fill them out, which in Joyfill just means creating documents from the templates. And then the documents themselves have the ability to be updated, listed, queried, and kind of all that good stuff. Anybody can jump into the Joyfill library or our Joyfill manager, see our implementation of a template library, and do the same exact thing using our API because we just use our whole API ourselves.
Awesome. And if someone wasn't using Joyfill or didn't plan to, what's the easiest alternative route to pull off a form library?
Just to store it in their own databases. It's really not, as you could see, it's not a lot. You just need CRUD, which is like create, read, update, delete, and then list abilities, which is kind of under read category. And then from there with Joyfill, when you're actually just pulling in those templates, you're filling them out. And you can think of that as you're submitting data into a template. And then you would have basic CRUD operation around the submission of the data as well, which is, again, the filling out of a template. You can get fancy with it. Like I said, you can get fancy with categorization, different deeply nested reporting or searching capabilities. But at a high level, there's only about 8 routes that you would need to add to support a full template library and submission-based workflow using those templates.
Awesome. Jeremy, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think it's a simplified version, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a simplified version for sure. You can get fancy, but storing the data is like storing anything else. It depends on how you guys want to implement it, especially if you're self-hosting. And by self-hosting, we mean like you're storing the data in your own backend.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing all that good insights. I think that concludes the scope of this video. I'm looking forward to discuss more on this topic and obviously other good form topics in the future. But until then, see you guys next time.
See ya.
See ya.